Imagine a man who walked alongside Jesus for 3 years, who watched blind eyes open, who stood at the edge of Lazarus's tomb and watched a dead man walk out alive, who sat at the same table as Jesus, heard his voice, touched his clothing, and now all the other disciples are saying, "We have seen the Lord alive." And this man answers, "No, I don't believe it. Unless I put my fingers into his wounds, I will not believe." What do you think happened next? And here's the real question. Why didn't the church condemn this man, strip him of his title, cancel him? Why did the church instead dedicate an entire Sunday to him? Every single year, for 2,000 years. Why did this one moment of doubt become one of the most important theological acts in all of human history? That's what we're talking about today. And if you think you already know this story, I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never look at it the same way again. Thomas Sunday, Antipascha. These words are spoken every year on the 8th day after Easter, and most people hear them and think, okay, another church holiday, moving on. But hidden inside this day is one of the most profound and most human pages of the entire gospel. A page about doubt, about honesty, about a God who is not afraid of your questions, and about the fact that sometimes the deepest faith is born exactly where the deepest doubt once lived. Let's start at the beginning. Who is Thomas? In popular culture, and honestly, even in church culture, he's almost always called Doubting Thomas. That phrase has completely escaped the walls of religion. People use it all the time. A doubting Thomas is just someone who refuses to believe anything, a stubborn skeptic, a person you can never convince. But here's what's fascinating. If you actually open the Gospel of John and read every single passage where Thomas appears, you find a completely different person, a deep person, an honest person, a passionate person, someone who got profoundly misrepresented by history. The first time Thomas appears in the Gospel of John is a critical moment. Jesus gets word that Lazarus has died and is heading back to Judea. The disciples try to talk him out of it, because people there want to kill him. The tension is real, the danger is real. And it's Thomas, of all people, who says, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Listen to those words carefully. Those are not the words of a coward. Those are not the words of someone who will later demand proof out of weakness or timidity. Those are the words of a man willing to die for his teacher, a man who would walk into danger rather than be separated from the one he loved. The second time Thomas appears is at the Last Supper. Jesus tells his disciples he is going to prepare a place for them and that they know the way. And it's Thomas, again, Thomas alone, who honestly admits, "Lord, we don't know where you are going. How can we know the way?" While everyone else stayed quiet, maybe out of politeness, maybe out of fear of looking dumb, Thomas raised his hand and said, "Hold on, I don't understand." He didn't pretend. He didn't fake it. And because of his honesty, Jesus spoke one of the most quoted sentences in all of human literature. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So Thomas is not a skeptic in the dismissive sense. He's a man who cannot accept something just because someone else told him so. He needs to understand. He needs his own encounter. He asks the hard questions. And here's the thing about people like that. God apparently answers them personally. Now, the main event. After the crucifixion, the disciples locked themselves in a room. They were terrified. And then Jesus appears among them. Doors locked, but he's there. He says, "Peace be with you." He shows them his hands and his side. The disciples are overjoyed, but Thomas wasn't there. He arrives later, and they tell him, "We have seen the Lord." And Thomas answers with the words that will define him forever. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Pay close attention to what Thomas does not say. He does not say, "You're all lying." He does not say, "That's impossible. Dead people don't come back." He says, "I personally cannot believe until I have my own experience." That's a different thing entirely. He's not attacking his friends. He's not mocking them. He's just setting his own personal standard for truth. And that's where things get really interesting. 8 days pass, exactly 8. And that number's not random, but we'll get to that in a minute. The disciples are gathered again, and this time Thomas is with them, doors locked again, and Jesus appears again. But this time he goes straight to Thomas, not to Peter, not to John, directly to Thomas. He says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." What does Thomas do? He doesn't even get to touch anything. The moment he sees Christ, he says something that becomes one of the greatest theological statements in the entire New Testament. "My Lord and my God." In Greek, ho Kyrios mu kai, ho theos mu. And here's the thing. This is the first time in the entire Gospel of John that anyone directly and openly calls Jesus God. Not teacher, not prophet, not Messiah. God. The man history labeled the doubter delivers the highest confession of faith. That's why the church doesn't hide Thomas. That's why he gets his own Sunday. Because his journey and the honest journey through doubt and out the other side produced the clearest, most direct declaration of who Jesus is. But now we have to ask, what did Jesus say back? He said, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." And this is where a lot of people make a mistake. They read this as a rebuke, like Jesus is scolding Thomas. "Bad move, buddy. You should have just trusted." But that's not what's happening here. First, Jesus fulfilled Thomas's request. He came specifically for him, showed the wounds. He didn't reject the doubt. He answered it. Second, the blessing for those who have not seen is not a condemnation of Thomas. It's a blessing for everyone who comes after, for you, for me, for every person in every generation who cannot physically put their fingers in the wounds. We have their testimony. We have the Gospels. We have 2,000 years of people whose lives were completely transformed by an encounter with the risen Christ. Not a physical encounter, but a real one. And Jesus says, the person who builds their faith on that person is blessed. Now let's talk about the name of this day. Antipascha sounds alarming in English, right? Like it's anti-Easter, against Easter. But the Greek prefix anti here doesn't mean against. It means in place of or facing. Antipascha is the day that mirrors Easter, the day when the resurrection echoes again, the day when what happened 8 days ago is confirmed a second time. And that's why it falls exactly 8 days after Easter Sunday. Why 8? In early Christian symbolism, 8 is the number of eternity. 7 days make a week, the cycle of earthly time. The 8th day is the day outside of time, the day of new creation, the day that points beyond the cycle toward eternity. This is why ancient baptismal fonts were built in octagonal shapes. This is why the resurrection happened on the first day of the week, which is simultaneously the 8th day. And Thomas met the risen Christ in exactly this symbolic moment. And right here, right in the middle of this conversation, I want to ask you something directly. If this topic is landing for you, if you want to keep thinking about things like this together, hit the subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. That takes literally 3 seconds. And drop a comment below. Have there been moments in your life when you were Thomas? When doubt felt stronger than faith? When you just couldn't believe what others around you seemed to believe so easily? That's an important question, and I read every single comment. Your experience matters, and I want to hear it. Let's get back to our story. There's another dimension to Thomas Sunday that rarely gets discussed but is incredibly important. It's the question of the body. When Jesus appears and shows his wounds, this isn't just proof that he's alive. This is a theological statement about the nature of resurrection. The wounds remained. That's the key detail. The risen Christ didn't appear in some abstract, bodiless form. He isn't a ghost. He isn't a spirit floating through the air. He isn't just a beautiful memory or a spiritual presence. He has a body with marks, a body that remembers suffering. And at the same time, it's a different kind of body. It passes through locked doors. It appears and disappears. It isn't bound by ordinary physical laws. Theologians call this the glorified body, and this has enormous implications for how we understand what happens after death. Orthodox and Catholic tradition insists resurrection is not just your soul goes to heaven. Resurrection is the restoration of the whole person, soul and body together, but a body transformed, renewed, freed from death and decay, a body that still carries the marks of its earthly journey, but in an entirely different light. This is exactly why Thomas matters so much. By reaching for the wounds or even being prepared to, he confirmed, yes, this is a real body, not a vision, not an apparition, the same Jesus who was crucified, and he is alive. What was Thomas doing during those 8 days? The gospel doesn't say, but we can imagine. He watched his friends, people he trusted, people he had known for years, overflowing with joy and certainty. They said, "We saw him," and he hadn't. He had a choice: pretend to believe, go along with it, smile and nod, or be honest about where he actually was. He chose honesty, and that honesty cost him 8 days of darkness, uncertainty, possibly the loneliest kind of loneliness, being the only one in the room who doesn't feel what everyone else feels. Does that feel familiar? Have you ever been in a church surrounded by people who seem to have this alive, burning faith, and inside you, there was just silence? When the words of the prayers felt like someone else's language, when people around you said, "Christ is risen," with such joy, and you stood there wondering why you felt nothing? Thomas knew that feeling, and God came to him, personally. This is so important to understand. God in this story does not punish Thomas for doubting. God takes Thomas's doubt seriously and answers it, fully, on Thomas's own terms. Exactly what Thomas asked for. Let me see the wounds and touch them. Exactly that is what God provided. He didn't minimize the request. He didn't say, "You should have just believed without evidence." He met Thomas exactly where Thomas was. Now, about us. Because this isn't just a video about ancient events. This is a video about what happens in us today. We live in a time when doubt is the default setting, when asking, "But is this actually true?" is considered the intelligent position. And honestly, blind faith without any questions is not a virtue. It's spiritual immaturity. But there's an equal and opposite danger. Endless doubt that never allows you to make a choice, take a step, commit to anything. Thomas is not an example of blind unbelief. Thomas is an example of an honest seeker. Someone who isn't satisfied with someone else's experience, who needs their own encounter. And that's a legitimate and respectable position. But there's a condition. The seeker has to stay open to the encounter actually happening. Thomas didn't slam the door forever. He didn't walk away from the disciples. He stayed. He showed up for the next gathering. He was available when the answer came. Doubt is not a sin. Doubt can be an invitation to a deeper encounter, but only when the doubt contains a real question, not just a wall to hide behind. Some theologians argue that Thomas is the apostle of our time, not Peter with his hot, impulsive devotion, not John with his mystical depth. Thomas, the man of questions, the man who needs to understand, the man who needs an encounter and not just a statement. We live in an age where authority alone convinces no one, where people want to see, feel, understand. And the God of Thomas is a God who responds to exactly that kind of request. But here's the nuance. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." This means there is a line, a place where "give me proof" shifts into something else, into a kind of closeness. There are moments when a person has already received enough, but keeps demanding more. Not because they genuinely want the truth, but because they're afraid of what the truth will require. Because if Jesus really did rise from the dead, that changes everything. It demands a response. It demands a changed life. And sometimes, unconsciously, a person closes themselves off from that discovery, not with their mind, but with their fear. Thomas wasn't afraid of what the answer would cost him. He asked for the encounter, and when it came, he opened completely. My Lord and my God, no conditions, no fine print, no, but first let me think about it for another 8 days. He chose, and that choice is one that every person ultimately has to make for themselves. Thomas Sunday is also historically a celebration for those who returned. In the ancient church, Pascha night was the night of mass baptisms. Those who had spent all of Lent preparing, the catechumens, received the sacrament on Holy Saturday night. They wore white baptismal robes for the entire bright week. And Thomas Sunday, the eighth day, was the day when those newly baptized removed their white robes. That's why it also carries the Latin name Dominica in Albis, the Sunday of the white garments. It's a symbolic transition. You're no longer a newcomer. The intense week of celebration is complete. Regular life resumes. But baptism doesn't end. It simply takes a new form. Every day, quiet, but no less real. And here's a powerful parallel. Thomas also undergoes his own kind of baptism on this day. He transitions from one state to another, from doubt to faith, from a disciple who questions to an apostle who testifies. And his baptism is the encounter with the risen Christ. Now let's talk about what happened to Thomas after. The gospel goes silent, but the church's historical tradition, recorded in ancient sources, tells a remarkable story. Thomas traveled farther than any other apostle, literally. He went east, to Persia, to India. He crossed half the known world. According to tradition, he reached the Malabar coast of India, established several Christian communities there, and died as a martyr in the city now known as Chennai, around 72 AD. Here's something that might actually blow your mind. Thomas Christians in India exist to this day. They call themselves descendants of Thomas and claim their church tradition runs in an unbroken line back to the apostle himself. This is one of the oldest continuously existing Christian communities on earth. The man history called the Doubter became the apostle of an entire subcontinent. Think about that. Thomas, who demanded proof, who couldn't just take his closest friends at their word, this same man then walked thousands of miles to tell strangers about what he himself had come to believe. He didn't just believe and sit down, he became a witness, an active, relentless, moving witness. Here's the lesson. Faith that is born through doubt and comes out the other side. It doesn't sit still, it moves people. It cannot be contained. Let's talk now about the nature of doubt itself, because this touches every one of us, whether we're religious or not. Doubt is not a character flaw. Doubt is a sign that someone is thinking, that they're not just absorbing everything on autopilot, that they're trying to figure things out. That's healthy. The problem starts when doubt becomes a settled position. When a person is no longer actually searching for an answer, they've just gotten comfortable with questioning. When skepticism stops being a tool for seeking truth and becomes a protective wall. Behind that wall, you can feel smart, independent, untouchable. But behind that wall, there is a certain loneliness. Because any deep relationship with God or with other people requires you to step towards something at some point without 100% guarantee. Thomas stepped. When Christ appeared and spoke to him, Thomas didn't demand more. He didn't say, "Okay, let me touch the wounds first and then I'll decide." He simply encountered him, eyes meeting eyes, and that was enough. My Lord and my God. There's something worth noticing about the exact words Thomas chose. My Lord. Those are words of surrender, of acknowledged authority. My God. Those are words of worship, of the deepest personal relationship. Both dimensions simultaneously. Not you are possibly the Lord. Not I'm beginning to think you might be God, but my Lord and my God. Total, unconditional, personal confession. Because Thomas went through the doubt, his faith came out precise, articulate, absolute. He knew what he had been through. He knew what his words cost. Let's talk about how Thomas Sunday is actually celebrated in Orthodox and Eastern Catholic tradition. Because the liturgy itself is a kind of theology in action. On this day, the same gospel reading about the appearance to Thomas is proclaimed. The royal doors of the iconostasis are opened, symbolizing the open gates of paradise. The Paschal hymns are sung again. The clergy are vested in white or gold. Everything communicates that Easter is not over, that we are still in its light. In Orthodox tradition, the Paschal season lasts 40 days, all the way to the Ascension. Throughout this entire period, the greeting, Christ is risen, with the response, truly he is risen, continues to be exchanged. These simple words are not just a nice tradition. Every time you say them, or hear them said back, you are participating in a chain of witness that stretches back 2,000 years. From Mary Magdalene, who ran with the news first, through the apostles, through the martyrs, through all the countless people who passed this word forward across the centuries. To you, you are a link in that chain. Thomas Sunday closes the Bright Week, but it does not close the Paschal season. That's an important distinction. The Bright Week is 7 days of peak intensity, full Paschal services every single day. Thomas Sunday is like a second Pascha, a renewal, a confirmation, another chance to encounter the risen one. For those who missed it, for those who were like Thomas, for those who still don't quite believe. In the traditions of Orthodox peoples, Thomas Week is connected with commemorating the departed, visiting cemeteries, praying for those who have died. In Russian tradition, this falls on Radonitsa, the Tuesday of Thomas Week, and there's deep meaning in this. We bring Easter to the dead, we go to the place where death is, and we carry to that place the news of the resurrection. Because in Orthodox theology, Pascha is a feast for all, the living and the dead alike. Christ is risen, and not one dead remains in the tomb. That's from the Paschal Canon of St. John Chrysostom. This isn't poetry, it's a theological claim. Death has been defeated. Those we loved and lost are not behind an impassable wall. They are in another dimension of the same reality. This unity of the living and the dead in Paschal joy. This is something central to understanding what the Church actually is. The Church is not just the people currently standing in the service. The Church is everyone who has ever been baptized into Christ, living and dead. Those already with Him, and those still here, on the way. We are one organism, one body. This is why visiting graves in the days after Easter is not a pagan holdover, as some people claim, but a deeply Christian act. We go there and we say, out loud or in our hearts, Christ is risen. We witness the resurrection to those who have died. We hold the connection. Now I want to say something that might seem unexpected. Thomas is not only a model for doubters, he's also a warning for believers. Because in religious circles, there's a danger of a different kind, becoming someone who has all the answers and has stopped genuinely seeking. Someone who says all the right things, shows up to all the right services, but whose heart hasn't had a real encounter with the living God in years. Thomas reminds us, faith is not an ideology, it's not a cultural identity, it's not a set of rules to follow. Faith is a relationship, personal, a living encounter with a living God. And that encounter requires openness, vulnerability, honesty, the exact qualities Thomas showed when he said, I don't know. I don't understand. I can't just take your word for it. That's brave, much braver than hiding behind external religiosity. Read how the Apostle John ends this chapter. After the Thomas story, he writes, These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. John is speaking directly to the reader, to us. The Thomas story is written for us because we are all unseen. We are all on the side where there are no physical wounds to touch, no locked rooms with appearances, no voice we can hear with our ears, but we have the testimony, and God considers the testimony sufficient. What does it actually mean to believe without seeing in practical terms? Because this isn't an abstract concept, it's a concrete position that a person either takes or doesn't take every day. To believe without seeing means to trust the sources that have come down to us across centuries, to trust the thousands of people whose lives were completely transformed by an encounter with the risen Christ. Not physical, but real. To trust your own experience, those moments when something happened in your life that you can't explain any other way. Those answered prayers, those feelings of presence that came from outside yourself. That peace that arrived in your darkest moments from somewhere beyond you. To believe without seeing is not to close your eyes and repeat formulas. It's to open your eyes wide and see what isn't visible to physical sight. Thomas saw physically. We are offered a different path, and Christ calls that path blessed. There's one more detail in the Thomas story that almost never gets mentioned. When Jesus says, "Stop doubting and believe," the Greek literally means stop becoming unbelieving, or stop being in the state of unbelief. This is not a permanent label. Thomas is not being called the unbeliever as a fixed identity. Jesus is describing a state that can and should change. Jesus doesn't put a label on Thomas. He calls him to movement. Here's another lesson. God does not lock us into our past. He doesn't say, "You were weak, therefore you are weak." He says, "You were there, now take a step here." That's not condescension. That's a call to growth. Every person has been Thomas at least once. Stood in front of a closed door, didn't know what to think, couldn't believe what others were saying, needed something personal, something undeniable. And in that moment, the crucial thing is not whether we have doubts. It's whether we stay in the room, whether we show up for the next gathering, whether we leave the door of our heart even slightly open, because He comes through locked doors. If there's even a crack of genuine desire, He will find the entrance. One more thing worth appreciating. The fact that Thomas Sunday exists at all is itself a statement. The church could have quietly moved past the Thomas story, could have emphasized only the triumphant encounters, the easy believers, the ones who got it right away. Instead, this story gets its own annual Sunday. 2,000 years of, yes, this happened and it matters, and the man who doubted is an apostle and a saint. That is the church saying, doubt is not disqualifying. The journey through darkness is not shameful. The honest question is not a sin. The church is saying, we have room for you, Thomas. And by extension, the church is saying it to all of us. There is room for the questioning mind. There is room for the person who can't feel it. There is room for the one who needs their own encounter rather than someone else's story. There is room and more than room. There is a Sunday set aside in your honor. If you are Thomas right now, if you are in that room with locked doors, if you cannot feel what everyone else around you seems to feel, don't give up. Your 8 days will end. The encounter will happen. The doors will open, or more precisely, He will come through them. If you have been walking in faith for a long time, remember Thomas. Don't look down on those who are asking hard questions. Don't be impatient with those who need more time, because among them, somewhere, are the future apostles of continents not yet reached. This is not a story about weakness. This is a story about how honesty opens the door to the deepest encounter. It's a story about a God who does not leave a single question unanswered, who comes personally, who shows the wounds because He is not ashamed of them, who speaks your name because He knows it. Christ is risen, and that is not just a greeting. That is the most important news the human race has ever received. Friends, if this video gave you something, if it made you think or question or feel something real, please support the channel right now. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet. It's completely free, but for me it means everything. It means these conversations matter. It means there are people out there who want to go deep, who want to think carefully about the things that actually count. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We talk about things that have weight, and I want you to be part of that. Leave a like on this video. It's a small action, but it helps other people find this content. Somewhere out there right now, there's a person who needs the Thomas story. Your like helps them find it. And most importantly, leave a comment. Anything. What landed for you? What surprised you? What are you still sitting with? Have you had your own Thomas moments? And how did you come through them? I read every comment and I respond. Your story continues this conversation, and this conversation is worth having. Until next time, Christ is risen.